What's going on, everyone? I wanted to take a moment to take a trip down memory lane and go through each of the three sets, some of the best leaders to come out of these sets that, or leaders rather, that really gave me some nostalgia of a certain meta in time, or still to this day are GOATs in their own right, since the rotation is actually coming up relatively soon. So with a huge thank you to my patrons, I've got a shout out immediately. Leia, as a lot of you found me on my Patreon from my first video, which is Leia Red. So huge thank you for supporting me this entire time. And let's dive into set one leaders first and move our way through. So I figure we got to work our way from bottom to top in this set, mainly because I wanted to start off with Boba Fett, the very first leader that was banned in the game, an absolute dominating leader. We have not seen any really quite like this one. Django, which we'll talk about later, spoiler alert, had some really big showings that were going to potentially compete with how much Boba was doing. One thing that Boba did that no other leader had done was the amount of versatility in how many different Boba decks were being played. We had Boba Green and Boba Yellow at like number 1 and number 2 spots. Then following that with Boba Yellow, or Boba Blue and Boba Red. All 4 of those decks were like top 10s of how many were top 8ing planetary qualifiers as of the initial set 2. As soon as set 3 started, we had the Boba ban, but this guy was an absolute disgusting leader that really just felt completely wrong. Like a 5 to deploy 4/7, we've not seen anything like this since then, but also having one of the most powerful effects in that you can affect resources in the game. Ooh, Boba just absolutely dominated. Alongside him in the cunning category, we had Han Solo, which still plagues us to this day, for those of you that are playing a lot of Premier these days. Han Green is at the top of the meta right now because of how powerful command heroism tends to be. But actually, this started off as a Han Solo Gamble 7s deck, where we would play U-Wing reinforcements into like a Count Dooku or a Luke Skywalker, which, you know, you still sometimes see those styles of decks where you play a random 7 drop, but it really was like I want to play the most powerful cards, and we didn't really have access to a whole lot of amazing removal back in set 1. And even going into like set 2, you know, we still saw the Gamble deck, but set 1 really initiated that, where like one powerhouse card can completely win the game for you in some matchups. Set 2 brought along double yellow Han, which was the majority of decks for a little while, where we had the DJ tech combo, and DJ just in general was an absolute menace, which is why we saw the DJ ban very shortly thereafter. Han Yellow started to dominate. So another absolutely amazing performer. As we move on, we've got Aggression in Sabine. This is another leader that still stands the test of time today. Has been at the top of the meta the entire time it has been in the game. Whereas Han Solo's fluctuated a little bit, like at the beginning of set 5, for example, we didn't really see a whole lot of Han Solo. Sabine has always been near the top. Always been near the top. In some ways, you know, she was weaker, and some she was like literally number 1. But always near that top 10 of decks in the meta any given time. The quintessential aggro and quintessential ECL deck that we've seen absolutely got a huge buff. I mean, back in set 1, it was just so dominant because of the Rebel powerhouse. I mean, if you think about all the Rebel cards that we've gotten since then, the majority of them are still in set 1. Like the Fleet Lieutenants, the Wing Leaders that were so powerful. That was set 1. We had ECL Steadfast Battalion, which honestly, in a lot of cases, you know, could be better than Poe Dameron in those times because of the overwhelm and the ability to just kind of knock out a bunch of damage on the ECL turn. Now that said, we also had Wrecker and Poe join the crew in set 2, which were amazing additions. It didn't rely on Sabine being alive, so, you know, was much more consistent, much less inconsistent for the deck. And those were great additions. As we moved along, honestly, it didn't change all that much. Sabine's Masterpiece came along, and we got some other additions, but Sabine has always been at the top of the meta and absolutely putting pressure on your opponents. into the command categories, we get to skip the rest of aggression because there's not really anything that I think is worth a GOAT mention. However, Emperor Palpatine certainly does. Actually, still another one that is at the top in this meta currently with Palpatine Yellow. Not quite like top 5 or top 10, but in the like 11th, 12th, 13th meta deck option. Palpatine Yellow specifically, but also Palpatine Blue, really, really doing some work across the meta. This is one, if you look back in like set 1, Palpatine was rated at like a C or B tier for me at that time because A to deploy was just super obnoxious. If you look at the meta at that time, it was Boba Fett, it was Sabine, and those two were by far the most played decks. Boba Fett deployed on 5, Sabine deployed on 4, and Boba Fett had 4 power and 7 toughness. It was super difficult to survive against these decks. It just felt like 8 resources was impossible to get to. As you introduce like set 2 and set 3, mainly when you start seeing set 3, and then as you go along, there were more opportunities for Palpatine to live because you had more answers, but also you had more, opportunities for ramp that introduced and more payoffs that allowed you to take advantage of the 8 deploy turn. Because Palpatine was always a very powerful leader. It was just, can you get there and can you survive? Well, that happened much, much later on with the tempo advantage of Yellow. That was a really nice addition, especially with cards like Maclunky and all the Underworld cards that you got in Palpatine. Cards like P38 when that came out. That was a great addition. Absolutely a menace in Palpatine. But also just his action was too slow and it slowly got better and better and better. And it just felt like Palpatine was always in the running as one of those, I want to play deep into the game and I want to just outvalue my opponent at some point. That's what you use Palpatine for. Definitely worth a GOAT mention. And then, honestly, I've got to talk about Iden. Iden's kind of fluctuated there, and we saw a little bit of a resurgence nearing the end of set 5. We haven't really seen a crazy amount of Iden here in set 6, as cards like Chancellor Palpatine or even Kira or Gar Saxon. But Iden really did, in some points, become that like ultimate hard control leader, and it was just the best version of Command Villainy Vigilance. I'll talk a lot about that in various different leaders, but Command Villainy Vigilance was always a core archetype. You just had the very powerful removal options of Vigilance, Villainy, like Power of the Dark Side, and No Glory, and then you also paired that with some really powerful removal effects in Command, like Overwhelming Barrage, but then the ramp and payouts of Command Villainy, like Super Laser Technician, you had Resupply, and then you got the payoffs of Darth Vader, Mauls, Devastators, which other archetypes just didn't have. You just didn't have that value of units to really take advantage of it. And Iden was the most obnoxious one at the time. I mean, if you look back in set 1, I mean, this was the most obnoxious deck. It was just heal, defeat, heal, defeat, heal, defeat. It was an ECL deck as well at that time. You had Steadfast Battalion in that, but you were playing with Rook, and cards of that nature. In some cases, actually in most cases, playing 30 HP bases didn't even really come across people's minds. You're like, how could you avoid using Tarkin Town or Energy Conversion Lab? I don't see any way out. In fact, set 2 is the first introduction of me playing 30 HP base, and still people were a little bit skeptical, myself included. But as the format became, extreme in set 2 and set 3, those 30 HP bases really started to matter, and some more powerful units came to be, where more aggressive strategies started to become really, really potentially dominant if you didn't have that extra HP. And that's when we started to see, Iden Data Vault when, that base was released, which was an absolute game changer for a lot of decks because 3 HP actually didn't do or did a whole lot. But, making yourself play 10 extra cards in your deck was kind of like a bonus in some cases because you had that more variety where you had so much concentration of good options that having the extra 10 cards in some matchups would actually give you an advantage rather than missing out on some of those cards. That was a really, really interesting one. And she's always been one that's kind of been still good, just is hard control, like ultimate hard control, what you want. Like, do you want to be stalling out the game and healing, or do you want that little bit of extra value or a little bit of extra pressure in the early game to put your opponent on the back foot or maybe stop some of the damage coming in? And we'll talk about some of those later on. That's set one. And again, some of these leaders are extremely nostalgic. I mean, some of these, we had some brief stints where they were actually solid. Like, you might be surprised, but Tarkin, this was like the budget deck back in set two. For those of you that didn't play during that time, but with the addition of set two, you had like Imperial, TIE Phantom. Oh my gosh, I forget the name of it because it's not played nearly as much. But the one that avoids Power of the Dark Side, where you can put some experience tokens on it, and it was like super tough to deal with. I mean, Entrenched, Traitorous, those are the types of cards that we kind of needed to deal with that. Luke had a stint where, Luke Green was very, very popular. We had Chirrut being a only Force deck at the time. Chirrut Red was like the thing to play Force Throw with, and it was actually viable. The other decks, I mean, you could mention Leia as well. I mentioned this earlier, but Leia was the first video I ever did on this channel, and it was quite competitive. It was able to compete with Sabine, and it was using Tarkin Town. It was like really the first deck that kind of utilized Tarkin Town to pretty good effect and just did some absolute work, especially since, you had time to build up a couple units and then get value out of Leia's action, whereas these days it's pretty tough, to be honest, especially with how many powerful cards are in the meta. But I guess the one other one I'll mention before moving on, because set one is so nostalgic for me, guys. It's crazy. Darth Vader. This is one that I've won multiple store showdowns with back in the earlier sets when I actually had a play group to play with. Darth Vader Blue was the deck. I was the ultimate nerd playing ultimate horror control with open fires, restocks main deck. I remember a couple of my store mates were playing like Aiden, and they were playing more controlling decks, and it was just immediate a win to Darth Vader because I was built to go to late game. I had the more powerful leader. I had the main deck restocks. Restock was a tech that people weren't even on in most cases. In fact, if you look back at some of my earlier videos, I think I did a full breakdown of the store showdown with my Vader Blue. But there was a lot of cards in there that that was absolutely just an absolute blast. And I miss I miss in some cases the simpler times. But at the same time, I'm kind of ready for set one to go. So let's move on to set two and talk more about that one. Going from bottom to top, again, the first leader we've got to mention, the only one from the cunning category, is Cad Bane. This one, when it initially released, honestly, there wasn't a lot of hype about it. Set two, I remember talking about this guy in previews, as this was the first set that we got previews for, really. And I was thinking about this, and I was like, getting the 1 damage, it could be relevant, getting a little bit of value here and there. Tarkin Town was not something that people were really on yet. And it was also a hard time to evaluate it because this was pre-Boba ban. You have to think about all the set 2 cards in a context of a pre-Boba ban meta. And so anytime I was looking at cards like Cunning Villainy, I was like, do I want to play Cad Bane or do I just want to play Boba? And the answer was always just play Boba. And so Cad Bane never got his spotlight until really set 3 and onwards, when Tarkin Town truly became the base of choice of the set 1 bases. Like, ECL was still in the meta, certainly, but Tarkin Town became the base, and Cad Bane really showed its colors. These days, you don't really see a whole lot of Cad Bane. It's still a solid deck, but certainly in the previous set, in set 5, we had a lot of Cad Bane value. Tarkin Town was a much, much stronger pace during that time. We saw a little bit of fall off with Tarkin Town during the set 6 release, and that is in the current meta. But we got a lot more Underworld cards that just give you a little bit of value, especially when Gem to Lightspeed came out. We had so many additional options for cards, leaders like Cad Bane and another leader that we'll mention a little bit later on. But always just a solid one, always just solid value and an amazing Tarkin Town leader. As we move on, we get to move into the aggression category, where we got to talk about probably one of the biggest goats of the game in Han 2. So we talked about Han 1, how it's at the top of the meta at the current moment. But guess what? Han 2 is also at the top of the meta. We have multiple Han decks. And if you were to combine all of the decks that Han 2 is top 8ing with right now, which is Han Blue Force, Han Green with ECL, and Han regular blue with no Force, they have a total of, I think it's like 50 decks in the top 8 placements of planetary qualifiers and big tournaments in the current meta. It is number 1 in terms of leaders in the top 8. Number 1. So this guy is still dominating. In the previous set, it was an absolute domination from Han 2. We saw Han2 from set 2 and set 3, Han2 Blue, doing some absolute work. This guy has consistently performed absolutely amazingly. And I remember revealing this leader. This is one of those leaders where, there are some things I get wrong, of course, and there are some things that I absolutely call, okay? This is one of them. When I read this leader, I was like, this is an absolutely disgusting leader. If it doesn't show up now, I do not see any realm where Han doesn't perform excellently. The ability to just play things for one cheaper is just so gross. It's so gross, in fact, that his flip of being a 5 to deploy 3/6 with just having his action on it is still good enough to warrant playing him, which some leaders, you need the powerhouse flip side on top of the action to make it worthwhile. This guy's a 3/6 for 5, which is normally considered pretty understated, but his action is so disgusting that he is a dominant performer. I remember so many people saying, you're on one, by saying Han 2 is going to be the best leader from set 2. And honestly, from his results, you can argue that Han 2 was one of the best leaders, if not the best leader from set 2. So huge memory lane from Han 2. I played so much of this guy. Han 2 green, Han 2 blue, Han 2 yellow, even double red we saw with like Wild Rancor in the meta, which top 8'd some PQs and even won some of them. So yeah, crazy stuff with Han. Absolute crazy deck. I'll mention some more in the honorable mentions, but as we move up, there's nothing from command. Really, we got to move on to vigilance, and there's 3 leaders that I want to talk about in this category, actually. The first one's going to be Rey. This one had a pretty good stint in some of the previous sets, and still to this day actually does quite well. I think it's worth talking about in terms of that kind of GOAT category. It's borderline, I'll give you that for some people, but it did dominate a meta there for set 4, I believe it was, with Jump to Light Speed, after some more bannings with Django being banned, DJ being banned, and Triple Dark Raid being banned. Rey was the deck to come out of that with the Data Vault. Absolute dominant performance. Just so much value. This is one, like I said about Han 2, where I was like, I called this one. This is one where I was like, I'm not sure. I'm on the fence. So I was definitely on the more wrong portion of that one. With its deploy being a 2/6, I was a little bit worried that I was just going to get killed immediately every single time. What ends up happening is the Restore 3 is just so powerful. And if you are completely drawing all your resources into Rey, well, they've got so many valuable cards in the late game to really, really outvalue you. And that's exactly what Rey did. So really good work from Rey. Another one we got to talk about is Gar Saxon. Now, this one is definitely more recent, but has always been one of those ones that has competed and top 8'd random PQs here and there. But as of right now, it's actually doing quite well in its ECL variant. And we saw some really good value from the previous set as well in set 5 because of Darth Vader's release. To be honest, that's the major contender. It made it so that you had this late game or mid game, I can press this button and kind of win the game in certain matchups, while also putting a ton of pressure on you with like turn 1 Secretive Sage giving you a 3/2 shielded, or turn 1 Director Credit giving you a 3/2 shielded. I always preferred the Gar Saxon yellow variant. ECL's fun and all, but I just loved playing like a million different shielded units. You had 7th Fleet Defender in that deck. You had Crafty Smuggler. You had your Dr. Evazan. You had, even more recently, like Shin Hati. You had so many different options in that deck. I always preferred Gar Saxon yellow, but Gar Saxon green definitely took the cake in terms of the more powerful of the variants at the current moment, at least. As we wrap up set 2 in terms of some GOAT leaders, we cannot leave without talking about Kira. My goodness, is Kira an absolute beast. And this is the one that I ended up settling on in the terms of what I played probably the most out of the initial 3 sets. If I include Spark Rebellion, Shadows of the Galaxy, and Twilight of the Republic, this is the leader that I played the most in terms of my competitive games. Now, I didn't play a whole lot of competitive games. I played, obviously, some store showdowns, which you can argue that it's not really competitive, but some of the more, bigger tournaments. But then I also played in, of course, the Galactic Championship with Kira, which I almost made day 3 with Kira. I ended up barely missing it with a 6-1 day 1 record and a 5-3 day 2 record. So actually a really good showing. because I didn't have like a win for my planetary qualifier and immediately in. So I ended up with a really, really strong performance with Kira. I just got a little bit of some unlucky matchups at the end there, which was a little bit unfortunate. But this Kira just absolutely crushed it for a lot of players. I mean, set 2 was one, and I remember reading her, and I was like, I don't know if this one's really going to do a whole lot, because I'm looking at this as it's essentially a 4/4 deploy leader. You have to get value out of the effect of damaging a bunch of units. I remember talking about this, and I wasn't sure that at the current moment was going to be good. As a reminder, it's always hard to evaluate leaders in a pre-ban meta when a leader's so dominant. So I was looking at Kira and I was like, okay, maybe you can kill Boba and that could be good. But the problem is that, Boba can also just completely run you through. Like, they had so many options. 4-LOM and Zuckuss were released at that time. So you could 4-LOM and kill Kira, and then, you can essentially get 2 of those resources back with Boba, and it was like, oof. But as she evolved, especially after set 2, really, set 3 and set 4 is really where she started to come into her own, and it started to become the deck to beat. Just having the flip turn of Kira plus Overwhelming Barrage was really, really strong. You had a little bit of a drop from Kira in set 5, which is the time I played the Galactic Championship with Kira, because of Force Throw, being able to interact with you and remove that kind of play pattern, but also just so many different Force leaders that were just maybe a little bit more higher value. And that was the matchup that I ended up playing that completely took me out. I played against day 1, I played against a Kylo Green, which was just your deck, but better, pretty much. And that was the one loss I had on day 1. And then day 2, the last matchup I had when I was 5-2 was against a Kylo Green, and it was just an immediate loss. Like, there was nothing I could really do. It was just a straight 2-0 to my opponent. It was just over. I mean, now it's like it comes down to a kind of like a restock game, but I wasn't really tuned to deal with a lot of the hard control decks because I was expecting to deal with mainly Han Blue, so I kind of modified my deck towards that direction. And you know what? That's what cost me the winning in, I suppose. At least into day 3, which would have been a fun experience. But this leader in general has just been absolutely amazing. So really, really cool to see this one, and a little bit unfortunate to see this one go. Honestly, I think this was one of the most interactive and fun versions of Control. I know some people would disagree, but if you look at the Vigilance Villainy command structure, where you had Idens, and you had Palpatine, and you had Director Krennic. This one was the earliest deploy of them all. Well, I guess Director Krennic's up there, and it didn't really focus in on I'm just going to play this leader, get some health back, or I'm going to do this and I'm going to get some health back, or I'm going to stall and get more value. This one was, I'm going to put yourself on the back foot, have this combination of cards, maybe combo with a devastating gunship. The leader deploy when you deployed was a really, really important factor for Kira, because that's why you were playing Kira, getting that extra damage split everywhere. I just think it was more fun. Not that it was an incredibly fun player pattern to play against or anything, but I just think this is the most interesting of the control options that we got. I'm a little bit disappointed to see this one go, because I like this one in terms of controlling decks in the meta. I'd much rather play against Kira than a Chancellor Palpatine Data Vault, for example, the new one from set 6. One that's just kind of plays a bunch of units for extra value and it draws cards. It's okay, that's just good, or that's just solid as a controlling option. I think I put it in A tier on my tier list or whatnot, but yeah, Kira. For some honorable mentions in set 2, I talked a lot about Kira because, as I said, that was the one I played the most. But honorable mentions in set 2, I got to briefly mention Bossk here. Bossk, absolutely incredible. Did some crazy things when he was released. With all the bounties, you could do things like Crate Dragon on turn 2. Not on turn 2, sorry. On turn 4. With some correct sequencing of cards and getting your double bounty claims. Obviously, Bounty Hunter's Quarry with double claim was absolutely incredible. This had some high value and still shows up every once in a while in the meta as a surprise win here and there. Another one is Kylo Ren. This one had some of the fastest wins we had ever seen. I remember in set 2, this was the turn 3 deck. You would load this guy up, you would just win some games. Some decks just weren't prepared for it. These days, it's a lot harder to do that because you have so many good cards in the format that, even a turn 1 play like Mina Bonteri, that used to be an Alliance X-Wing, for example. That wasn't a 2/4 with so an extra toughness that also has Restore 1, that also draws you a card when it dies. It was okay, here's a 2/3 space. You know, that's like the level of turn 1 place that we had gotten changed. So Kylo Ren actually got weaker as time went on. Even though there were some improvements that you could make, it certainly got weaker just because of the fact that there were so many powerful additions to the early game that people could compete, not even by specifically trying to mess up Kylo Ren, but just by making their deck better. After that, there isn't really any other card in here that I would mention for honorable mentions. I'll throw one out for your Fennec lovers, as I know I've trashed on Fennec, and I know I still do, and I know you guys love her. So we'll throw a quick shout out to Fennec. Let's move on to set 3. This one's interesting because it has the least leaders of all 3 of the sets that were actually worth kind of considering as the GOAT leaders. But at the same time, some of these are some of the most dominant leaders that we have seen. In fact, one of them was banned. So first off, we're going to talk about Quinlan here. Quinlan, this is one where, you know, we initially started and Quinlan Green was in the conversation alongside Quinlan Red. I remember seeing Quinlan Green and I was like, this is weird. I'm surprised people are even playing Quinlan Green. I was always kind of a fan of the Quinlan Red over Quinlan Green. But again, this is one where, you know, I'm looking at this 5 to deploy 3/7 and I'm like, oh, Boba Fett seems a little bit stronger. Are we going to get value out of this 1 damage to an enemy unit? It turns out that yes, you do. And yes, you get a lot of value. Disrupting the early game was key. I definitely remember raiding these leaders, and it was in a meta that was completely different. So Tarkin Town was not even a thing, not even really a consideration for the most part. Like it was very rarely in the conversation, but this is one of the leaders where like you kind of started to think, okay, maybe Tarkin Town is something that you could do. And I remember playing some games on like Tabletop Simulator and things like that with Quinlan and actually doing some really, really amazing stuff. And I was impressed. Obviously, that deck got super refined and much, much better later on. And it got more and more great cards. But this is sort of the shift, right? Set 1 and set 2 were ECL and kind of dominated by that style of meta. As soon as set 3 hit, it was Tarkin Town. Set 3 and set 4 were all Tarkin Town. For the most part. And then set 5 and set 6 have been this like mid-range value format. So it's kind of shifted as time has gone along. So Quinlan's gone up and down over the course of time, but this is one that was absolutely exceptional and one deck that was super annoying to beat because the other thing that introduced with Twilight Republic was 5 to deploy Force leaders. This is really, really critical. If you look back in set 2, and I can just go flip back here to set 2, and this is one of the things that really kind of shifted the thought process. If we look at like Shadows of the Galaxy, none of these leaders are like early Force leaders, okay? The one exception is Kylo, which is a 4 to deploy Force leader, but it was an all-in style of leader. It was like a very aggressive style deck. So it wasn't really what I would imagine when I'm thinking like, okay, an aggro deck, but it's not like super all-in. That's where you come into Quinlan's area because Quinlan was suddenly a 5 to deploy Force leader with not like 4 toughness, so it doesn't just die immediately. That allowed you to play cards like Force Throw in the deck. And that really started to shift the meta. And of course, on set 5, we had an absolute domination of this. And that's when we saw the Force Throw ban, right? But Quinlan was like the Force Throw deck. It was so obnoxious to play because Force Throw was such a disgusting card. And wow, Quinlan just completely shot that up. Huge value from just that leader alone. As we move on, we got to talk about Jango. This is one of the very few leaders that are actually banned in the game. Both Fets are banned. We got Boba banned and Jango banned. And honestly, Jango was a menace. I remember rating this guy and I was like, guys, I don't see how this guy's going to be really good at all. And again, I was looking at this guy compared to Boba Fett and I'm like, okay, you know, we could play Jango, but I don't really see wanting to play this guy over Boba Fett. And then Boba Fett got banned, and I'm like, wait a second. This guy suddenly looks a little bit better. And then, of course, we had the meta introduction. We had a few teams, KTOD, I think a couple other teams, like, guys, you got to check out Jango Red. They did an amazing job on, like, kind of tuning that list and doing some work on it. And I remember playing it, and it was good. It was good. It was one of the top 5 decks of the set 3. And there were cards like P38 that were revealed shortly after. Because I remember reading Jango Fett, and I'm like, we don't really have many things that like come down and deal damage to things to trigger Django. But then cards like P38 got revealed, and then suddenly you're sitting there like, oh, well, this makes total sense. And of course, you had like Ruthless Raider and like ISB Agent from earlier sets that did some work. And this was just an annoying leader. I mean, this was one of the most unfun play patterns to play against, because it wasn't like you were just dying. It was like you were dying, but you could not play the game at all because you just got every unit exhausted. Another thing to note with this is Triple Dark Raid was in the game. Now, Set 2 introduced Triple Dark Raid, and we never really saw an amazing Triple Dark Raid deck. Set 2 had the Tarkin Yellow with Triple Dark Raid, which is good. But Set 3 with Django, you had so many amazing vehicle units that you wanted to grab with Triple Dark Raid that really, really moved that so much further up that you were like, oh my gosh, I need to play this Triple Dark Raid Django deck. It was like an all-space strategy. I remember playing a ground version of Django Fett, which was good, but it just eventually ended up being just an all-space strategy with a couple of early game units like Crafty Smuggler, ISB Agent in the ground arena, and then you just rely purely on your space game plan. This leader was just disgusting. It just did really well in Set 3, but honestly, the thing that made it disgusting was Set 4. Oh my gosh, when Set 4 had some of the cards revealed, it was a nightmare scenario, like absolutely nightmare scenario. I remember playing this and I was like, yeah, Django needs to be banned. I remember saying this. I was like, Django needs to be banned immediately. I remember playing some, and I was counting the other days. Like, in fact, one of the few community posts on my channel you'll see has me saying 6 of the 8 top 8 from the recent tournament are Django Reds. Yeah, I think he needs to be banned. And a lot of people were like, just wait. I was saying that you could potentially just ban Triple Dark Raid, and maybe you've solved the problem. Maybe you need to tackle Tarkin Town, but something with Django needed to be banned because they introduced so many cards that were so gross with both Triple Dark Raid and Django. Cards like IG-2000, the ability to do 1 damage or something, and it's 3/4 space unit. You had War Juggernaut, which was, oh my gosh, that card was so gross. With Triple Dark Raid, you would grab your War Juggernaut, completely exhaust all of your opponent's units with the Django flip. So you would do it on like the Django flip turn. You'd have, and you deal with damage to your own units. You'd attack for like 9 to 10 damage, and you've exhausted every single one of their units. That is just like an incomprehensible play in these day and ages, and it was just completely dominating the game. It was so gross. And you also had cards like Devastator to close out on the top end with your Triple Dark Raid. So it was nasty. Absolutely nasty, and that's kind of what caused the ban with Django. It was Set 4, and it completely dominated the meta in the very early stage of Set 4. Now, it didn't dominate in the same way that Boba dominated. It was much more unfun to play against Django, in my opinion, and many people's opinions at the time. But also, it was one deck. It was Django Red. That was it. You didn't really see Django Yellows, or Django Blues, or Django Greens. There were like here and there because people were trying it out, but Django Red was like 90 to 95% of the decks. Whereas when you talk about Boba, yeah, Boba Green was maybe like 40 to 50% of the decks, but you also had Boba Yellow being like 30 to 40% of the decks, and then you had Boba Red being like 10 to 15, and Boba Blue being 10 to 15%. So you had like a huge spread. So Boba got banned just by being straight up dominant across the board and having multiple decks that were just super strong, because the leader was disgusting. Django got banned because of the interaction between Django, damage dealing, and Tarkin Town. You got all your units exhausted and all of your early game units killed by Tarkin Town. It was disgusting. As we move on, there is literally only, well, I guess there's 2 leaders in this grouping that I would like to mention. Anakin would be the next one, and this one is mainly from recent times. We saw a little bit of Anakin Blue pop up in Set 4, even in Set 3 and Set 5. There was definitely some Anakin that showed up, but actually Anakin really came into its own in this recent set. That's mainly because Anakin always was one of those leaders that was quite good to do like value trades, but we're starting to enter into a very mid-range heavy format where you're taking a lot of these trades, and now you get to use this Anakin action to just get a little bit of extra value. You had a bunch of additional command heroism cards that really fit well with Anakin Green. And you also had Data Vault release in Set 4, which allowed you to get that extra 3 HP to take advantage of even more damage on your base from Anakin potentially. But it's really just the other units like Mina Bonteri, Captain Typho, those types of cards. And you had the ultimate value engine in the late game now with Caloran Beck and Home Ones being added to the game. This one, honestly, is pretty straightforward. It didn't have nearly as complicated of a storyline as cards like Django did, or cards like Quinlan did, that really had like meta shifts that completely defined their archetype and like created those meta shifts. Anakin is just one that was a benefit of card releases. It's a leader that, or an action on a leader that, if you're trying to make trades, it's going to be good. And right now, that's something that you kind of want to do. Your space units with the extra 2 damage allows you to outclass opponent space units. Your ground units with the extra 2 damage allows you to outclass ground units for your opponents. And then you end up with just a leader that ends the game with like 5 to 6 to 7 power when it deploys, and you just end the game. That's pretty much straightforward. This is kind of just the meta that we're in, and Anakin really, really, really does well. And on that note, another leader, and actually the current #1 deck of the format right now, is Yoda Green. Now, this is an interesting one as well, because similar to Han 2, when I spoke about Yoda, I was like, this is the best leader from set 3. The best leader. Now, I was a little bit early for that. Because it didn't really start to come into its own until set 5. Set 5 and set 6. So I was a little bit early, totally. And, you guys were right at the time. It was still good, but it was not quite the level that it is now. You had so many new additions from set 5 and set 6 that made this what it is. For one, in set 4, you got Data Vault, which, again, so many decks are using Data Vault now. It almost feels like a broken record, even mentioning Data Vault. But the other thing about this is that you just have so much value from Yoda's flip. I mean, you have a removal option on your leader flip. That is incredible. You also had a huge toughness and ability to kind of continuously restore, which is really, really nice. Not only that, but you also have the really amazing combo potential of Yoda's action. His frontside action allows for the most absurd turns in the game, like turn 4, for example, or even earlier, let's say turn 3. So you've ramped on turn 2. On turn 3, you're on 5 resources. Let's say you had a unit on the battlefield, like a Village Protectors or something in the earlier game, or even like a Menabon Terrier or Yaddle, and it dies. You suddenly get to go use your Yoda action, put a Luke on top, and then you're my only hope of Luke on turn 3. Turn 3. That's insane. What an insane, that just completely shifts the game and completely ends the game, because you also have the most valuable leader in most scenarios by having the Restore 2 and the ability to remove a unit. And then with set 5 adding Caloran Beck, you had JTL adding blue leader and kind of value pieces like that. Home 1, these types of cards just completely dominate the late game. You didn't have cards like Darth Vader in the earlier stages of Vigilance Heroism Command. It wasn't the same level as Villainy Vigilance Heroism, Villainy Vigilance Command, where you had like Darth Vader's and Avengers to end the game. Nowadays, you do have cards that are not quite like that, but similar in terms of value and win in their own right. Like Caloran Beck can sometimes be stronger than Darth Vader by, getting you multiple big units like Caloran Beck on the 11 resource turn to get you a Luke Skywalker as well. Now, again, it doesn't happen like crazy often, okay? But it certainly can, because the games can go that long at this point. So Yoda doing some absolute work and being the #1 deck in the format. And, I'll say as we wrap up here, we'll talk about some honorable mentions here. And before I talk about my final points, really there isn't a whole lot of honorable mentions that I think are worth mentioning from set 3. You could talk about like Captain Rex being the ultimate Unity of Purpose deck. I actually think he's a little bit worse than some set 6 leaders, so I don't even know if that's the case. Or even Chancellor Palpatine getting an addition from set 5 with Anakin doing some work. But again, I don't think any of these other ones are worth talking about. So it really was a top heavy, where like just a couple of leaders from set 3 really showed their true colors. But as we've gone through the iterations of meta, I'm going to make this last point here before I let you all go. I know you guys love hearing me talk, but set 1's meta was super, super dominated by 3 archetypes. And you had very distinct archetypes. You had the more mid-range, slightly aggressive deck in Boba. It was honestly just slightly aggressive because Boba was so overstated. If it was a 3/7, I think it would be a little bit different. You had Sabine, which was very, very aggressive, like a pure aggro deck at the time. And then you had Iden, which is like pure control. And honestly, those metas kind of stayed for set 2 as well. As soon as set 3 happened, we had a super early game focus meta with Force Throws, Tarkin Towns, Quinlan, Django, Cad Bane, Sabine. Super, super early game focus meta. And honestly, you just couldn't fall behind in the early game, otherwise you would just completely lose. And some decks just got pushed out because of that. And that was set 3, and honestly, set 4 a good amount. Then come around set 5, and we've entered into a very, very value-oriented mid-range meta. Set 5 was all about getting the Force and using that to get some huge advantages, draw you extra cards, and get extra value from your removal options. And as we get to set 6, I mean, we've got cards like, it's commit heroism across the board. You got Han green, Yoda green, Anakin green, Han 2 green. All of it's kind of focused around getting value out of the command heroism cards like Captain Typho, Mina Bonteri, drawing you a couple extra cards, utilizing Data Vault in most cases, and then just getting to that mid to late game where you can leverage Keller and Bex and home ones. Those are kind of the meta shifts. And I'm curious to see what rotation's going to do. Because if we look at the top decks of the format, like if I look at the top like 10 leaders, let's say, you've got Sabine in there. You've got Palpatine in there that we talked about earlier from set 1. You've got Kira in there, Anakin, Han 1, Han 2, and Yoda. So of those leaders, you've got 3 that are outside of the first 3 sets. So this rotation is going to change a lot, which is why I wanted to do a video like this, because it's always fun to review kind of the nostalgic times of each of these metas and what each leader kind of did for the game. I've started to realize, it kind of feels, it's kind of silly to say, because I've been playing the game for so long that I forget that I've been playing the game for so long. I mean, it's not like a crazy amount of time, but we're approaching like 2 years of the game. And that's crazy to think about, because the way I see it is like, that's just how the game's always been. But, there was a lot of people that come in and like, yeah, I just started playing, like set 5 brought me in, or set 4 brought me in, and they don't even know. They don't even know. So hopefully that was fun for you guys to listen to, talk about. For those people that, maybe I referenced a leader that you're like, oh my gosh, that was even a playable leader, or before the bans, right? Like Boba and Django. I mean, there's some of you out there that have never played a game against Boba or Django because they've been banned the entire time you guys played, which is crazy. Like, you guys don't even understand how dominant these guys were at their time, at their peak. I mean, they were, before you're like, maybe we can unban them. No, you can't unban these guys, okay? Every single time I've tried to play these guys, even like in an open format, yeah, it was just not applicable. Like, it was just completely dominant. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you guys have been sticking around the entire time, I know some of my patrons have been playing the game since set 1. Let me know in the comment section down below. Let me know what leader you're going to miss the most. I mentioned Kira as one that I'm going to miss the most. I do think that's just one of the more interesting controlling options that I not necessarily that I'm like super into in terms of like casually playing, but definitely my favorite competitive style of deck. In terms of actual leaders that I'm going to miss for fun, it's got to be Kylo, guys. It's got to be Kylo. I know some of my patrons out there have also felt that way. Some of you have actually literally found me because of my turn 3 wins Kylo deck, and I'm going to definitely miss this one. This is just one that, like, if I wanted some fun, quick games, I drop in a Kylo, I win on turn 3, I lose on turn 3, whatever it is, and we move on with our lives. So let me know in the comment section. Whew, that was a nice little rant, guys. Thanks for making it to the end if you had. I didn't expect it to be such a long video, but as soon as I started talking about the game, I remembered all these things, and it's a little memory trip for me, okay? So hopefully you enjoyed, and I'll see you all for the next one.